Guys, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good morning. Thank you.
Good morning.
A little early here today. A little early, not too early.
Yeah, that's great. I'm working from home today. I don't normally do that. And so I just got on early to make sure all my equipment connected. So
Let me know if you have any other tech issues with Teams. My team's here also to help me out here, just in case. Hi, George. Good morning. Good to see you. Crystal's here.
Gilbert, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Turn you down a little bit. We can definitely hear you.
Morning, Ida.
Good morning.
That sense of urgency.
Everyone's coming in at the same time. Bill's here. Okay. Morning. Morning.
Morning, everyone.
Just taking attendance here.
Good morning.
Morning. Jeff is here. Let's see.
Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Jeff Becker. I'm having a camera problem, so I'm going to leave and reboot my computer and just join again.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, a few of us might have camera problems at about 11 o'clock this morning.
Okay.
When the World Cup game starts.
What a coincidence.
Many of us has dual screens and we'll see it on the other side. Make sure it's on mute.
Oh, that's right. 11 a.m.
Yes.
game today. Is this the final group match for USA?
It is.
It's
It is.
in or out.
Winner go
So that'll
home.
be the run
Winner
of
go
the-
home.
Yeah, winner go home.
Who's the superstar on the team this year, or for the World Cup?
They're all new.
Christian
I think.
Pulisic.
Yeah, Pulisic.
Yeah.
Thanks. It is 9:01. We do have a majority here. I'd like to learn more about the World Cup. We could wait a couple more minutes for the handful of people that are outstanding. So we'll give them a little bit more time.
Everyone's holiday was good, I hope, being this is the week after Thanksgiving and we're all getting ready for what may come in the next few weeks. Parties and chocolate and food.
Well, down here in Southern California, all we want is rain.
Yes, I'm in LA today. I'm looking outside. I was a little hopeful this morning, but yeah, it's marine layer. Gone now.
That's it. Yeah. Kind of like fool's gold,
It is, it is.
just a teaser.
But you know, if any of you are Trojan fans, we're in the Pac-12 championship, so we're good.
Go Bears.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. The University of Spoiled Children.
There's a lot of financial aid at that school, let me tell you. That moniker is not always as well deserved as it used to be.
No, you can pay to get your children on the crew, even if they've never
Yeah.
rode anything in their life.
That's right.
Yeah, that did perpetuate the myth a little bit.
I heard it was University of Second Chances.
That was years ago, not now.
Yeah, there's no myth about jail time.
Unfortunately, you're talking about my time there, not the present. All right, I think we should get started, Gilbert.
Okay. Okay, everyone. Thank you again for having us here today after your Thanksgiving. Oh, let me let in David. He's in. Hi, David.
Hey,
Morning.
how you doing?
Just kicking off the agenda.
Long time no see.
Just kicking off the meeting here. Thank you again for joining us after your Thanksgiving break. Hopefully you had a wonderful time with your families, had a lot of turkey. Looking forward to having you collaborate here with us in this meeting today. Just to dive into the agenda here, I wanted to just give a quick overview about what's happening. But before I do that, my name is Gilbert Lara, fairly new to DSA, started back in March. And now I am the PSCC coordinator. So any emails that you have received, any agenda items or anything like that has come from me. So now you can put the face to the name. And if there's any other questions that you have regarding PSCC, all the correspondence will come from me. So diving into the agenda, there are a couple, we have a lot of presentations today. Please let me know if you do not have the agenda. I did attach it to the meeting in the calendar invite. I could attach it here if you'd like. I could do that really quickly. Does everyone have the agenda?
Yes.
Okay, great. So just to go over it really quickly, and after covering the agenda overview, I'll pass it over to Ida for introductions. So we have, first off, introductions, obviously, like as I mentioned, the PSCC membership updates. We'll have some announcements regarding vacancies and announcing a new chair. There will be code updates by Eric Drever and Diane Gold. Battery storage by Eric again. Cal Green. Topic with electric vehicle charging, carbon reductions, CO2 monitoring. Another presentation on accessibility, the 2022 Triennial Code Update, 2022 Intervening Code Proposals. All gender bathrooms will be covered again by Eric Drever. We'll be talking about Plumbing Code Part 5, accessibility provisions. After those presentations, we will have any regional issues by our regional managers. If there's any issues that our regional managers would like to bring up to attention to the PSCC, there will be an opportunity for the managers to present. Finally, PSCC member input. This is where our membership will have any discussion items, any issues they'd like to bring up and talk about in this meeting that we did not cover today. Finally, a wrap up is to discuss future meetings. As I mentioned, I am the new coordinator, so I'd like to present to you some dates that I have in mind and see if that works for the group here. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Ida for introductions to DSA staff.
Thank you, Gilbert. Welcome, everyone. Good to see you all assembled on Zoom again. We always appreciate the time that you offer to DSA. I know that we haven't met for a year, but we've had a lot of other collaborative and task force going on, many of which you are on. I see many of you who are very involved in all our task forces. So this may be a bit repetitive for all of you, but I do think it's good feedback to get, to listen to each other and hear what everyone has to say. And that might provide additional perspective or additional points of discussion, even if you may be familiar with everything we're presenting. Because we've been working on so many of our task forces and doing our work, we haven't felt the need to convene the PSCC. We want to make valuable use of your time when you are here. So we try to make sure that our agenda is filled instead of meeting regularly. I do want to remind all of you that this is a collaborative effort. So if there is a reason that you want the PSCC called, please reach out to Gilbert, and we will arrange that meeting to discuss. Well, I know we have our set meetings, but it is important to understand that if there are issues that you need discussed and you want to address among the group, that we could either convene the meeting that we have planned or see what we can do in getting people together. So this is something that we work with each other on and get feedback from each other through this process in working with DSA. Before I get to introductions, I did want to let you know that part of the reason we also haven't convened is we are extremely busy right now. As you well know, we've had appointments for $2.6 billion of construction in November. And in December, we're anticipating 2.6. In November, we've had almost 1.3 billion. So we are actually facing over a third of our workload for the entire year in the last 2 months. And that, of course, is happening because there's a code change coming up that does have some significant impact for your projects. Namely, some of the items we'll be discussing today, which is the requirements for solar PVs and battery storage based on, the code and the particulars of the regulations that will actually require these for your projects. So the code change always does bring a influx of work. This one seems inordinately high. However, we know that construction costs are high, and because when they're based on construction costs, it may be that the work is actually typical, just that the costs are greater. Other than that, we've been also in a period of hiring. As you well know, we're all back in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, available with you to meet. Our work still does continue remotely. However, the regional offices, in order to manage the workload and get projects out the door, do have the flexibility to say, we need you to come in to do a back check so we can ensure we get this out. So please respect those needs that the regional offices set depending on workload, so that we can get items off our books and into your hands for construction as we progress. We are in a hiring spree, as well as all of you are. We've had some retirements, some shifts for people leaving, and so hiring is not easy these days, as I'm sure you will know as well. So also be patient with us as we work through some of those issues. Other than that, I will start off with introductions of DSA staff, and maybe we can popcorn it. So I'll pass it off after I introduce myself, and then each of you at DSA can pass it off to the next. I'll start. Obviously, I should have, Gilbert introduced me, but as you well know, I'm the state architect. And so I'm going to pass it on to Kurt and for him to introduce himself and say a couple words. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Kurt Cooknick. I am IDA's deputy, and I appreciate all your time. As I told the staff, that when you organize a group of volunteers, you have to consider that they're giving up billable hours to help us out as volunteers. And on the other side of that, your work does not stop. So the time you contribute here is just held in abeyance until we're done. And we greatly appreciate your time in giving us direction on many issues, and we won't waste your time. So thank you very much for being here today. Pass it off to Mr. Rush in San Diego.
Good morning. It's nice to see everyone. Craig Rush, San Diego Regional Manager and Principal Structural Engineer. It's nice to see everyone. Good morning.
Doug, do you want to go next?
Okay, I'm Doug Humphrey, Regional Manager, DSA Los Angeles. Glad to have this group back together and glad to be here, part of this. Thank you.
Tessa?
Dessa is out today, Ida.
Okay.
She has a stand-in. Where are you, sir? Rod?
Is it Rich?
I mean, I'm sorry, Rich.
Rich?
Sorry.
Good morning. This is Rich Tanayo. I'm sitting in for Dessa, representing the Oakland office. I'm a supervising structural engineer.
Thank you, Richard. And Harlan.
Hi, good morning. I'm Harlan Raymont. I'm the regional manager in Sacramento and principal architect, and thank you for being here.
All right, let's pass it over to Eric Drever.
Morning, everybody. It's nice to see you again. I know the last time we reconvened was in October of last year. That was my first opportunity to meet you. I believe in looking back on those, on that recording, yet to actually start. So it's nice to actually be in the office and working with all of you today.
Eric, why don't you introduce the rest of the others in the room, please?
Sure. To my left, maybe to your right, Paul Johnson. And new staff senior, Paul is our senior electrical engineer. And new staff with us today is Michelle Davis. She's our senior architect accessibility specialist. She appears on the agenda, but Ida mentioned we're extremely busy and the regional offices absolutely are that. We actually have a deadline tomorrow to submit our rulemaking. So I'm going to excuse Michelle. I'll be covering her topics that are listed on the agenda, but she's got a bunch of rulemaking to finish up, and so that we can be prepared for our submittal tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow. I apologize. Diane?
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Diane Gould, Principal Structural Engineer for DSA Headquarters Structural Codes and Standards Group. It's good to reconvene and see everyone again this morning.
George?
Morning, everybody. George Barnes, Principal Fire and Life Safety Officer out of headquarters.
Diane, why don't you introduce the rest of your staff that may be on the call?
Yes, I think I know Ryan Turner's on the call, so I'll pass it to him. I think that may be the extent.
Thanks, Diane. Yeah, I'm Ryan Turner, Supervising Structural Engineer with Codes and Standards and Headquarters. Glad to be here.
Okay, and I do believe that constitutes everyone. Oh no, Kurt, you want to introduce your team on the call?
Certainly. From communications, we have, of course, Gilbert, and then we also have Andrew Smothers joining us, and Jem and Taj from Affiliate. And I do not believe Sean is joining us today. Yeah, I don't believe Sean is joining us today. So that is the codes, are the communication staff.
Thank you. I believe we've introduced everyone at DSA, and so I'm going to call on each of the others to introduce themselves and the constituency group they represent. Dave Carina. He is on the call, but he's mute. Dave, if you're speaking, you're mute.
I was muted. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
That's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, Dave Carina. I'm the inspector member of the group. Appreciate being here and meeting everybody. And I want to throw out a quick compliment out today on your project inspector recertification. A lot of people were nervous. I got a lot of phone calls from people about it. I had a personal experience with it. It was completely seamless and it worked really well. Didn't have any problems with it. So the phone calls that I returned, I let them know, just trust whoever's doing it, in charge there. Erica did a fantastic job of it too. So great job.
Thank you for that feedback. Dave, I appreciate it. I'm sure Diane appreciates it too, since that's her part of her.
Sorry, I forgot to mention you, Diane. So, but great job.
You're always very generous with your compliments. Thank you.
Devin Conway.
Good morning, everyone. Devin Conway. I am the civil engineering representative, and I'm with a design firm called Verde Design. Well, I'm glad to be here again.
Eric Swenson.
Yeah, Eric Swenson. I'm a geotechnical engineer and engineering geologist, representative, state director for CalGeo, and that's my constituency that I'm representing.
Thank you. Fred Diamond.
Good morning, everyone. Fred Diamond with Citrus College, and I'm one of your community college representatives. So,
thank you, Fred. I know that you're on a lot of our groups, so I appreciate your attendance here. Jeff Becker.
Good morning, everyone. Jeff Becker. I'm with the Office of the Fresno County Superintendent of Schools and chair of the Coalition for Adequate School Housing, representing K-12.
Thanks, Jeff. Joyce Best.
Sorry about that. I am Joyce Buss with Lionakis. I'm a structural engineer, and I am serving at the request of SEOC, the Structural Engineers Association of California. I'm also with Lionakis.
Thank you. Laura Noss.
Hi, everyone. Laura Noss. I'm also with Lionakis, representing the architects and AIA.
Thank you, Laura. I know that you're also on a lot of groups, so I appreciate seeing you again here this morning. Phil Armstrong.
Good morning. Good to see everybody again. Phil Armstrong of the Lightfoot Planning Group in Carlsbad. I'm a landscape architect. I'm representing the state landscape architects.
Thank you. David Sikota.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is David Sikota. I'm with Jensen Hughes. I'm an alarm specialist, and I'm representing the fire life safety community.
Thank you. Steve Taylor.
Sorry, my camera is not working, but this is Steve Taylor with Taylor Engineers, and I am representing the mechanical engineering community.
Thank you. Crystal.
Good morning, Crystal Stajeski, Acting Supervisor for Code Development at CAL FIRE Office of the State Fire Marshal.
Thank you, Crystal. Tanjeet Juneja.
Hi, this is Tanjeet Juneja. I'm with Walter P. Moore. I'm a structural engineer and principal and representing structural engineers. I'm calling in, filling in for Raphael today.
Thank you. Jennifer Thornburg.
Good morning. I'm Jennifer Thornburg with the California Geological Survey. We work on contract with DSA to support them in reviewing geotechnical and geologic hazards. Thank you.
And finally, if I haven't missed anyone, Clint Williams.
Good morning, everyone. I am Clint Williams with Turner Construction, and I am serving as the general contractor representative.
Thanks to all of you for being here. I think, Gilbert, we can go to item 3.
Okay. Item 3 are vacancy announcements. Just wanted to bring it to the PSCC collaborative attention that there are 2 vacancies, electrical engineer and general contractor. Just wanted to let you all know that if anyone is interested or has anyone in mind, to please encourage them to submit our forms to apply for the PSCC. There's also the 3-year cohort will be ending next year. I'm anticipating a meeting next year in March. So if you would like to renew your membership to the PSCC, please feel free to reach out to me. You can renew your membership, or if you would like to encourage others to apply, please reach out to me. And that's it for me on vacancies.
Thank you. So what we do have a chairperson that's typically elected for the PSCC, and actually, Gilbert, Susan Rattel was the chairperson, right? And isn't her spot vacant as well?
That is another vacancy, yes, but wanted to go to the next topic after that. So I just wanted to make that announcement for vacancies. The chair spot is also open now, yes.
Right. So if anyone is interested, usually the chair is someone that and you can read the charter. They can reach out to you, and also we can reach out to you in getting feedback absent a meeting, and having one-on-one discussions. How about we need to take the temperature of X? Can you reach out to the PSCC members and encourage them, or you basically kind of like are our point? Does anyone want to volunteer themselves to replace? As you can see, it wasn't a very labor intensive. I don't even know if we ever used them, so I don't mean to be intimidating, but we do like to have a chairperson that can help us in just organization and outreach. And so if any of you are interested, please let us know now. If there's more than one, we can take names, and then by the end of the meeting, just make a decision. But we will take a volunteer if anyone wants to volunteer.
Did I see Laura Noss raise her hand?
Laura's got her plate full, I think. She's also the incoming AIA Central Valley president, so I know what work she's got coming on there too. So.
Says the outgoing AIA Central Valley president.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's give it some thought. We'll circle back at the end of the meeting when you kind of see where this goes. And if not, we'll work offline to get a chairperson going so that we don't delay in our meeting. Gilbert, do you want to follow up on item 4? Thank you.
Yes. Code updates and others. I'll pass it over to Eric to frame the topic and kind of segue into the presentations here.
Gilbert, I think next on the agenda was actually CEBC. Is that with Diane?
I have code updates and Eric. So yes, that is Diane. My apologies. Yes.
So we can go ahead and flip to me. That's fine. I do have a slideshow. I'm going to see if I'm smart enough to figure out how to share my screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Regulatory update.
Yes.
Great, thank you. So as Ida mentioned, we're on the precipice of the new code becoming effective, the 2022 Title 24 that becomes effective January 1, 2023, and that's keeping us very busy. The interesting thing about our admin code part 1 is it's actually been effective since March 5th of 2022, because that goes into effect 30 days after it's recorded with the Secretary of State. So right now, as Eric mentioned, we're very busy closing up what we call our pre-cycle code development for the 2022 intervening code. So that becomes the supplement that will become effective July 1, 2024. And as he mentioned, we have we have a deadline tomorrow to submit that to BSC. I believe Eric's going to cover some of the other areas where we had some significant changes to the 2022 codes as far as the codes that my team oversees, which is part 1, the admin code amendments, as well as the structural provisions in part 2, the California Building Code, as well as the CEBC. We didn't have many significant changes with this new cycle, mostly edits to technical requirements in order to provide further clarity or consistency. No significant change in practice other than I would like to note, and for those even this group, you saw these proposals before they went to the CBSC last year. The admin code section 4-330 used to give once you got approval at DSA, you had 1 year to commence construction, and then you could come in for an extension. You could get a 1-year extension up to 3 times. So we have edited that language to just allow a 4-year approval. So construction needs to commence within 4 years of approval. So what that saves is coming in for the extension. It's not, you still get the 4-year window. And within the CBC, we had early adopted, in last intervening code cycle, early adopted some provisions for mass timber that came through with the 2021 IBC. So we went ahead and repealed our amendments because they're now part of the model code. What we have here is what is referred to as the cigar charts, sort of a horizontal bar graph that shows the various timelines for, as I mentioned, that intervening code cycle. DSA, as well as several other state agencies, have been busy conducting workshops to assemble and consider what are code change proposals for the intervening code cycle. So you can see that's pre-cycle effort is this gray area here. December 1st is the deadline for all the agencies to put in their initial submittal to the Building Standards Commission. There are a lot of eyes that go into the review of this package. We have to submit our package to DGS and to Finance in addition to BSC. There's also an opportunity, there's several opportunities for public comment along the way. The first one coming up will be the Code Advisory Committee meetings. Those are going to take place between February to March of this year. Oh, and so the next item I wanted to talk about is the content of the intervening code package that we're putting forward. Again, the portion that my team oversees consists of the part 1, the part 2 structural provisions, and part 10. And for the most part, our package is consists of editorial corrections and adjustments to improve clarity in our language, and doesn't necessarily involve a change in regulatory effect, with the exception of section. We do have to make some revisions in part 1 to section 4-310, which talks about non-school structures. As well as 4-314, which is the definition of a school building. And the reason for that is there was a bill passed last year, AB 306, which resulted in new code sections, the Ed Code section 172, I'm gonna mess it up, 172.83.5 and 810.50.5. And what that does is it takes out of it considers housing projects for employees and faculty to be non-school building, regardless of whether they're located on a school campus or not. So that takes them out of the review for DSA. So we needed to update our admin code language to align with that new statute. Beyond that, the content of our intervening code package, like I said, is mostly clarifications and alignment of provisions and not a change in practice. I believe that the next item on the agenda is to talk about something that again, one of the collaboratives that we formed in the past month is in the past year was our DSA existing buildings task force, and that came about. We recently published a series of IRs, our IREB series, which were intended to provide guidance on the existing building provisions, the triggers specifically that are found in section 4-309 of our admin code. And one of the things that we know that some districts and facility managers fear is the so-called 50% rule, the 50% trigger, right? When you put when a project cost exceeds 50% of the replacement cost of the building, then a mandatory structural rehabilitation is required. So we realize that that can sometimes be a challenge to districts and facilities planners to provide predictable project planning. So we formed this existing buildings task force to explore different solutions that helps in that project planning process, encourages building reuse, and ensures that when existing school buildings are modernized, that safety standards are also addressed. So we formed the task force. We held a series of 5 meetings over 5 months, and the task force consists of, there's some members here today who sit on the task force, and we've received great feedback from, but we formed it based on we drew representatives from the 4 regional areas of DSA. We had representatives from school districts, community college districts, architects, structural engineers, mechanical engineer, contractor, cost estimator, cash, the community college chancellor's office, just because we wanted to hear, first of all, that the first order of business was to hear case studies and understand examples of these triggers, the rehabilitation triggers. Our team members brought examples of projects where the triggers worked well. They also brought cases where the triggers didn't work well. And based on those case studies, we started to explore where there was opportunity for change. So there was not enough time given we weren't sure if we were going to have time to implement change as part of this intervening code cycle, or maybe explore changes for the next triennial, which would become the 2025 CBC. As you can see by the slide, we were not able to implement changes as part of the intervening code cycle, but we are looking into a white paper to try to develop and explore alternatives. But what I can report that some of the solutions we have come up to date. One of the things, sorry, and I sort of skipped over it, but I mentioned the IREB series, as some of you may or may not be familiar with. There's the infamous IREB4, which which addressed how to perform the calculations when it comes to the 50% cost trigger. And there was originally only one method evaluation, and that was to use the OPSC cost numbers per square foot. Those numbers were very low. We revised IREB4 to provide two alternate valuation methods. One is alternate valuation method A, I believe, is to find three similar projects within a recent span of time and compare those, the cost of those for the replacement cost. There's also you can hire a cost estimator to provide that cost. One of the things that DSA was able to successfully put out an RFP and hire a cost estimator to give us, they are going to develop for us a data set that gives us building replacement cost numbers that are tuned to the building type and the region, so we can come up with better numbers, better default valuations to be used for that replacement value. So we actually have a meeting with that cost estimator this afternoon, and they're providing us an update on providing those values. But I believe they're shooting for having those values available by the end of this year. So we'll be able to update IREB4 with those standard valuations with much better cost numbers. Another solution that we were able to develop through the assistance of the task force is some revisions to the IREB3. So IREB3 deals with the what we call the evaluation and design criteria report. So before you even go into a rehabilitation, you have to sort of put together the plan of what you're going to do, right? What are the assumptions that you're making? What is the information that you have? And sometimes, well, oftentimes that involves destructive testing and investigations, and that can be pretty cost prohibitive on certain types of buildings, and may be viewed as not really adding value to the process. So we were able to pinpoint certain conditions that were considered low risk buildings, single story wood frame buildings. So if certain conditions are met, we will now permit the waiver of material testing if those conditions are met. And the last item on the side is the white paper I mentioned that will be utilizing the assistance of the task force to help us explore possible alternatives to the 50% rule. And that is all that I had for my portion of the presentation. Looks like Laura has her hand raised.
Thanks, Diane. Just real quick, how are we going to communicate the low risk building piece and when? And then secondarily, kind of the white paper alternatives, are those setting up for the next code cycle, or what are your thoughts?
Yes, so IREB3 is actually in what we call secondary review, which is the next step before it goes to publications for posting. So we've had a few things we're juggling with all these publications we're trying to update by the end of the year. So when that goes out, there would be an announcement to our listserv. So if you're on our listserv already and you get those announcements that, hey, here's a new document that's posted, or here's an update, it would be communicated that way. IREB3 has been updated to define this waiver. But as you know, as you've heard on our task force, and we've tried to tell anyone who comes in with those projects, we have the language as drafted, so that is available for use, even though it's not on the streets yet, so to speak. Our DSA staff is aware of that. So when you come in for your pre-app meeting, be able to discuss that. And your second question, the white paper. Yes, the goal is to explore alternatives that would lead to possible proposals for what we call the 2024 triennial code cycle, which becomes the 2025 CBC, which would become effective January 1, 2026. But the good news is that, you know, we will have the better cost estimator values for the default valuation for the replacement value. So we're very hopeful that that will provide some relief there.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any others have any other questions for Diane? Okay. Moving on then to battery storage with Eric and his team. Eric, take it away.
Thanks, Gilbert. Thanks, Diane. So again, Eric Drever, Principal Architect over Architectural Codes and Policies. And what that encompasses is fire life safety, accessibility, gas program, as well as sustainability. So battery storage is a topic du jour. It's really becoming very popular, and it's in part triggered by some upcoming requirements in the 2022 for not only the installation of photovoltaics, which we'll cover later, but also the possibility of, depending on the project, battery storage or energy storage being required. And this comes out of the Energy Code, which is, of course, promulgated by the Energy Commission, but enforced by local jurisdictions and DSA for schools. So in that, it encompasses a lot of parts of what I'm responsible for. I thought I'd just sort of set the table in that way. We've got a few presentations, or a primary presentation, which really focuses on the fire life safety aspects of battery storage systems. We've had some significant submittals to DSA recently for battery storage systems, which bring with it some significant fire life safety hazards. Battery systems can be explosive, very flammable. There have been recorded incidences which end up in thermal runaway. And so because of all of these dangers, DSA is in the middle of writing an IR. The IR I'll let Craig speak to a little bit later, but what I thought we'd do is start with a presentation by George, our fire life safety principal, and he'll go over some of the fire hazard issues, some of the upcoming, or some of the 2022 code requirements, which DSA will be enforcing. And then we'll, at the end of that presentation, Craig, if you wouldn't mind stepping in and expanding on some of the structural implications of that IR. And I'll have Paul speak to some of the energy code requirements after Craig speaks, if that's acceptable. So without further ado, I'll let George share his screen, who's coming to us remotely.
We'll get this set up here. And we'll give our brief presentation here on battery energy storage systems. Predominantly what DSA is targeting at the moment are those outdoor installations. So this presentation will kind of focus on outlining the criteria briefly from California Fire Code Section 1207, which will be applicable come January 1st. So as our introduction, as I said, comes out of section 1207 of the fire code. Battery storage systems certainly aren't new, but as Eric said, with the Energy Commission now directing that these be installed, we're going to certainly see more and more of them on our campuses and within your communities. So generally, the battery storage criteria is broken out as to indoor installations, which can be either in mixed-use buildings or in dedicated use buildings. And of course, outdoor installations, predominantly using pre-engineered or pre-packaged units. These generally consist of uninhabited outdoor storage units placed on the campuses, and per 1207.8 of the fire code, these are broken out again into either remote locations or those deemed as near exposures. Given many of our campuses and the congestion that they already see by size, I anticipate that it will be the near exposure requirements that most of the designers will be dealing with. And again, there's a picture of some indoor and outdoor prepackaged units. Generally, the outdoor ones are going to be in converted ISO shipping containers. And so we get into Chapter 12 of Title 24, Part 9, as I mentioned, but also many of the articles within Title 24, Part 3, the California Electrical Code, are going to contain the requirements for the designers to follow. NFPA 855 is a nationally recognized standard. However, if you check Chapter 80 of the Fire Code, you'll note that the Office of the State Fire Marshal doesn't necessarily adopt this standard specifically. Primarily, that's because with the reformatting of Section 1207 in the 2022, many of those requirements a few years ago were during the code development process were coordinated with 855 and the revisions to UL standard 9540. So if any of you care to go through 855 and compare it to section 1207, you'll find that the requirements are extremely similar. Then of course we have the applicable UL standards. 1741 for equipment, 1973. The two primary ones that will affect our installations are 9540 and 9540A. And to understand what we're talking about here, talking about energy storage systems, which as defined in the fire code, constitutes one or more devices assembled together capable of storing energy in order to supply electrical energy at a future time. There are energy storage cabinets, which consists of a cabinet containing those components of an energy storage system that's included in the UL 9540 listing for that system. Generally with cabinets, personnel are not able to enter these enclosures. They're pretty small. You open the door and it has the capability for staff to reach in to perform service and maintenance, any other kind of repair or touching or modification of equipment they have to do, but they don't physically enter these cabinets. Energy storage system, the electromechanical will be a term that you're going to hear a lot. Is an energy storage system that stores energy. It produces electricity using chemical reactions and includes things such as battery ESS and the capacitor energy type storage systems. And then, of course, energy storage system, again, defined as stationary. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. It's something that's installed in a fixed or stationary location. And then when we talked about pre-engineered and pre-manufactured, this is really where we're going to end up right here. It's an energy storage system walk-in unit, prefabricated building that has all of the equipment within it. It has doors that facilitate walk-in access for personnel to, again, maintain, test, and service this equipment, generally used in outdoor mobile energy storage system applications. So a couple of quick overview changes here from the 2018 to the 21 International Building Code. 21 IBC, which is adopted as the model code basis for the 2022 California Code, no longer treats battery storage as an incidental use. So the electrical installations and transformer elements of CBC Table 509 were removed. And as far as the International Fire Code, again, there were some technical changes to Section 1207. A lot of that was done in coordination, again, as I said, with UL 9540 and 855. Added some standby power requirements for ventilation, additional construction documentation, some decommissioning plan requirements. And the big kicker is that it now limits the individual battery array size to 50 kilowatt hours. Continuing on, again, aligned the requirements in 9540 and 855, as I said. When we talk about UL 9540, what UL tests for and what that listing encompasses is the fire contribution and the control mechanisms that are associated with these energy storage systems. The 9540 listing does not test for or include any review of the structural provisions that these pieces of equipment are required to comply with per Section 1207. It does contain conditions requiring full-scale fire testing per UL 9540A under certain conditions, and it did increase the outdoor separation distances. So, what are we talking about here? We're talking about battery storage, a whole lot of energy in a little small package. We're holding up a lithium-ion battery. It's pretty small. You put a few thousand of these things together, and during a failure event, it can be pretty catastrophic, as can be seen from just some photographs here. So we're talking about battery technology. Out of the standard, we're talking about lead acid batteries, which are pretty old school, but still used, lithium ion batteries, nickel metal hydride are coming on board, as well as nickel cadmium batteries, and of course the capacitor energy storage technology. So let's look at a little bit of the general installation requirements. Again, we're talking about Section 1207. Scope of Section 1207 in the Fire Code is that it is applicable to energy storage systems that exceed the threshold quantities outlined on Table 1207.1.1. And it states that it directs that when these threshold quantities on the table are exceeded, that the energy storage systems have to comply with the requirements of 1207. So really what we're going to be talking about here is those installations that go beyond or meet that threshold requirement where that is exceeded. And that's how we get into the 1207 requirements. If you're under the thresholds, then no, you're not. But when you look at the thresholds in these tables, they're pretty small. For example, we're talking about capacitor at 3 kilowatts, low batteries at 20. You can see lead acid at 70, lithium ion, the predominant battery being used right now. We're talking 20 kilowatt hours is the threshold. Anything above 20 kilowatt hours, you have to comply with 1207, and other battery technologies as listed here in the table. So Section 1207.1.3 contains 10 elements that need to be included as part of the construction documents. So designers need to review 1207.1.3 and make sure that their submittal packages at a minimum include these elements. So obviously a site plan as to where the equipment is going to be installed, any details of hourly fire resistance ratings of assemblies enclosing the ESS where it's applicable, and certainly the quantities and the energy capacity and the type of battery technology being used. That's going to be the basis for referring back to the tables in 1207, which are going to then establish the specific requirements necessary for compliance. Copies of the manufacturer's specifications, their ratings, and their listings for each of the energy storage systems being installed. You're not limited to any one battery technology. You Campuses may be installing multiple types of technologies. So we're going to need documentation on each of those types of technologies being used. Description of the energy management system for the batteries, the location of signage, which is required per the fire code as well as the electrical code, details on required fire suppression, the smoke and fire detection systems being used, thermal management, ventilation, exhaust, deflagration, venting systems, if those are being provided as part of the manufacturer's product. The support arrangement associated with the installation. It includes the required seismic restraint. So you're going to need to have calculations showing how the weight of this equipment is being anchored to the base to make sure in the seismic event things aren't getting thrown out of whack and causing a problem. And just as an example, 600 kilowatt system of lithium ion batteries generally equates to about 7 tons. So there's some significant load here in an earthquake event. Commissioning plan compliant with 1207, as well as when you take these out of service, a decommissioning plan. How are you going to shut the thing down? How are you going to move it off site, dispose of it, whatever. So enclosures for ESS need to be of non-combustible materials, so we're not going to be seeing any of these things built out of wood. The primary purpose is to contain a fire to the cabinet or the enclosure so that heat doesn't transfer to other locations. And really that's kind of the big thing here with battery storage. When they start to fail, it's how do we contain that heat to the area of involvement, excuse me. I'm sitting in the middle of an Austrian clock shop. So really, when we're talking about that heat transfer and when these things develop or fail, that's really the threat that we're worried about. Adjacent exposures, heat transfer inside the units from one battery array to another. And that's really the purpose of that 9540 testing and listing is they're going to look at that. If an element, a battery array fails, how much heat is generated and is it transferred to the adjacent one? And we don't want to, we're looking to limit or minimize any kind of catastrophic events. Electrical disconnects for the system need to be within sight of the main electrical service. If it's not in sight, code will require placards or directories be provided to identify, where are these disconnects so that emergency first responders can shut these things down. Enclosures need to be separated from areas of buildings. When they're located inside a non-dedicated use building, then the separation requirement is by means of a 2-hour fire barrier. Stationary ESS has to comply with the seismic requirements in CBC 16A, as I mentioned earlier. Working clearances still need to be provided around all of the equipment per the electrical code to allow staff and service and maintenance personnel to get in and make any necessary adjustments or repairs to the system to keep it functioning at an optimum capability. Walk-in units, remember we're talking about pre-engineered, those pre-manufactured ISO type shipping container units are to be entered only for inspection or maintenance. They're not to be occupied for any other purpose. So somebody shouldn't be putting an office in there or something along those lines. For outdoor units, which can be occupied, then they're going to be treated as a battery storage room. And then, of course, all of the additional requirements for battery storage rooms are going to have to come into play. So electrochemical protection, we're talking size and separation. This is one of the elements that changed going into the 2022 code in that they have to be battery arrays have to be segregated into groups. that do not exceed 50 kilowatt hours, and that each group must be separated by a minimum of 3 feet from other groups and from walls when located in any kind of a storage room or area. So it's those separation requirements and size requirements that really come into play now for 2022. So for those campuses that may have installed systems under prior code additions, this will certainly be an impact that you'll recognize. Maximum allowable quantities, we're getting back to those items on the table again. When we talk about exceeding those quantities or those threshold limits. These threshold limits were established based on fire testing. The amount of stored energy can only exceed those listed on table 120752 when based on a hazard mitigation analysis and large-scale fire testing accomplished in accordance with UL 9540A. So we really want to make sure that those designs stay within those permitted thresholds so that the school districts aren't held up in getting these installed and complying with the energy code. And then, of course, we're going to look at mitigation measures that address the hazards. That's all what's going to be in that hazard mitigation analysis. Fire detection required. An approved smoke detection system or radiant energy sensing fire detection system needs to be installed per 9072 of the fire code. These will be installed to cover those areas, areas in the walk-in units where we have this electrical chemical process occurring. And these systems need to be able to transmit alarm signals to a central station, proprietary station or remote station in accordance with NFPA 72, or an approved constantly attended location, similar to what we already do for fire alarm systems on our school campuses. Rooms and areas within buildings and walk-in units have to be protected by an automatic fire suppression system. As we saw early on, these things can be subjected to failure. When they do fail, the fires can develop rather quickly, and so fire suppression is an important element of these installations. Predominantly going to be accomplished through automatic fire sprinklers, and if that's not available for some reason, then an approved alternative fire extinguishing system can be permitted when it's based on large-scale fire testing. This will be something that DSA will have to look at and establish, as Craig will tell you, is our upcoming IR that we're working on, because certainly we have campuses within the state in our rural areas where they may be able to install fire sprinklers, but they don't have the water supply to support the sprinklers. So what becomes the point? What do we do? Are we going to require water tanks and pumps to meet the design requirements of the sprinkler system? Or what kinds of alternative fire extinguishing systems can we look at that we feel are going to be equal in mitigating the fire threat? Maximum enclosure size specified by code for these walk-in units is 53 by 8 by 9.5, a little over 4,000 cubic feet. So if we do end up in that alternative fire suppression design mode, we're going to be looking at the cubic volume of those containers and what kind of fire suppression agent, the quantity of agent that will be necessary to control an event. And you wonder where this size comes from. Well, it's pretty much based on the largest ISO intermodal shipping container that's on the out in the world right now. ESS located outdoors or in open parking garages need to be separated from any means of egress. Obviously, to ensure the safe egress under fire conditions is provided, in no case less than 10 feet from buildings. Placement of the units outdoors certainly shouldn't be impeding or impacting any adjacent egress from school buildings. Some technology-specific protection requirements are looking at exhaust ventilation when it's required by Table 12076. Standby power, excuse me, as I mentioned earlier, was a change for code, has to have a minimum power capability to run the exhaust for 2 hours. gas detection system if that's required, spill control and neutralization provisions, explosion control to be provided, safety caps to be provided depending on the battery technology when required. You know, one of the big things with lithium ion is thermal runaway. And once it has, this event has started, it is difficult, if not impossible, to stop within a cell. I'm sure we've seen pictures in the news of electric vehicles catching fire and burning forever and ever. Events where the fire department has, you know, put the fire out and then the cells have ignited on the tow trucks on the way to the, you know, wrecking yard or whatever. So thermal runaway is a real big issue, and that's certainly where the predominant failure mode is going to occur. This protection needs to be provided when required by 12076 or elsewhere within the code for the batteries or other ESS. And the batteries and any or other energy storage systems have to be provided with some sort of a listed device or an other method to detect and minimize the impact of thermal runaway. Most of the time, if you're installing or purchasing a pre-manufactured, pre-engineered unit, these types of things have already been incorporated into the design and have been part of the testing and listing. So, some indoor requirements. Real quick through this because I want to focus more on the outdoor. When we talk about indoor installations, there's two types of buildings per code. They're considered dedicated use buildings or non-dedicated use buildings. The terminology is pretty self-explanatory. If a dedicated use building isn't going to have anything in it other than your battery storage equipment, there may be a small area, code will permit 10% or less of the floor area for some kind of an office or something to be there. But generally dedicated is pretty focused. Any design and construction has to comply with 12077. And really more importantly is we want to look at those specific features as indicated on table 1207.7. That's going to highlight the targeted compliance features and refer you back to other sections within 1207 as to how achieve compliance with each of the individual features. So outdoor, we're talking about those installations that are going to be complying with section 1207.8.1 through 8.3. And we're talking about exterior wall installations as well here. Those are considered outdoor installations, and those comply with section 1207.8.4. These are treated as remote installations or near exposure installations. The outdoor installations are generally going to consist of those big shipping container walk-in units. Could consist of cabinets like we see here in the picture, about the size of a big refrigerator. You put in cabinets or the walk-in units, they could consist of multiple units installed side by side. So you know, daisy chain these things together. So when we talk about remote installations, as I said at the beginning, I think that DSA will see those installations that tend to meet more of the near exposure, and this is why. Remote installations are those where the energy storage system is located more than 100 feet from buildings, lot lines, public ways, any stored combustible materials, hazardous materials, high pile stock, and any other exposure hazard. So you can imagine the impact on an existing smaller campus in trying to put something 100 feet away from all of these. Excuse me. So if we are fortunate to have a campus where you can meet this requirement, we're going to be looking at the compliance features identified on table 1207.8, unless there's something specifically exempted on that. And for 1207.8, for example, it exempts the size and separation requirements because we're more than 100 feet away from a building or a threat. So they're going to allow the system to get a little bit larger than those maximum allowable quantities. So installations near exposures is where I feel we're going to be the most of. And obviously, if a remote is more than 100 feet, installations near exposures are defined as those that are outdoor installations that that are not provided the 100-foot separation, and these must comply with all of the features identified on 1207.8. So we're going to be including those size and separation requirements. So installations considered near exposures are to be separated by a minimum of 10 feet from all these elements here. Lot lines, public ways, buildings. You see the shopping list is pretty similar to what we just had for remote, right? But now we can get down to 10 feet. Now there are 3 exceptions which will allow that 10-foot separation distance to be reduced. An exception 1 will permit the reduction down to 3 feet if a 1-hour freestanding fire barrier is constructed. That fire barrier needs to extend at least 5 feet above and 5 feet beyond the physical boundary of the ESS installation. And it's basically there to provide that the barrier between the installation and any adjacent exposures. Second exception, again, allows the reduction down to 3 feet where non-combustible exterior walls with no openings or combustible overhangs are provided on the wall adjacent to the energy storage system installation, and the fire resistance rating of the exterior wall is 2 hours. So if you have an existing building that has non-combustible exterior construction with no openings and a 2-hour wall, you can pop these things within 3 feet, down to 3 feet of separation. If you don't have a building that meets this, then certainly you're going to have to look at the upgrading that existing building to meet these requirements. And then exception 3 allows, again, down to 3 foot, where you construct a weatherproof enclosure of non-combustible materials, which covers the ESS, and it can be demonstrated that a fire within the enclosure will not ignite any combustible materials outside the enclosure based on large-scale fire testing. I don't see exception number 3 being used that much because of the cost involved with submitting this to UL for a UL 9540A test, a large-scale fire test. So I think we'll be ending up more in the exception 1 and 2 range. And outdoor, again, at the early onset, I mentioned, also includes exterior wall installations. So yes, smaller units can be attached to the exterior wall of buildings. These do, however, are limited in capacity to 20 kilowatt hours. And the ESS has to be compliant with the requirements in 1207. And when we're talking about pieces of equipment, just like many other DSA elements, it has to be installed per the manufacturer's instructions and listing. So in addition to the code requirements, you're certainly going to want to incorporate any of the manufacturer's requirements. When we mount these on the exterior of a building, they have to be separated from each other by a minimum of 3 feet. And it has to be separated by 5 feet from any doors, windows, or operable openings or HVAC inlets on the building. So for these two right here, 4 and 5, it's noted that these can be reduced based on large-scale fire testing. So we're not limiting you. We're not saying you can't do it. We're just saying if you want to go less than the separation requirements here, we're going to have some listing documentation that that this wall-mounted unit has been subjected to the 9540A testing requirements. So really, what's the important takeaway here? When we're talking about outdoor installations, it is the compliance features that are indicated on the tables, tables 1207.7, 7.8, and 7.9, which are going to direct compliance with the various general provision requirements in sections 1207.1 through 1207.6.5. It's kind of section 1207 is kind of unique where when you go and read through it, you have all of the requirements up front, but really it's the back end requirements in the tables that direct you forward. So you almost want to go to the back and then come forward. What kind of an installation is it? go to that section, be it indoor, outdoor, whatever, and those compliance features on the tables will direct you back forward to the front as to what specific elements need to be incorporated in your design. So just a brief overview. Excuse me, if there are any questions.
Yeah, Eric Swenson here. I got a question on if we're going to be updating IRA4 at all to affect foundation requirements on these things. I've actually been involved. I do quite a bit of solar work. And these, as you said, these things are quite heavy. And just wondering if that's going to be an element of any kind of updated requirements.
I'll leave that response to Mr. Rush, who will be talking about the structural features. FLS isn't going to be looking at the structural features, but certainly when we plan review, we're going to want to make sure that the structural engineering folks are happy with the design and how these are anchored down. So I believe Mr. Rush will be answering that for you.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
You're welcome. Anything else? If not, I return this to the group.
Thank you, George. Appreciate that comprehensive discussion. So this is Craig Rush. I will just kind of have more of a general discussion about the battery storage, and we can get into some specifics. And Eric, just to jump way ahead, from what I've seen about these battery storages, even though the mass is rather large, they weigh a lot. Typically, they're on mat foundations, and these are squat little buildings that the underlying soil conditions I don't think are really going to necessarily affect the structural performance.
I've got entire battery farms where they're putting these things on drilled piers. They're putting them on helicals. We've got liquefaction issues going on that are driving foundation costs through the roof.
And we've not seen that yet at any of the school locations. So certainly if the underlying soil conditions can't support a mat foundation, then something is going to have to be addressed. But and I will bring that concern up to the group that's examining these types of structures right now so that we can be ahead of the curve on that.
Yeah, I mean, just like we have the carport structures, typically, those things have got requirements where we have to do a geologic hazard report.
Right.
If we're in a geologic hazard zone is usually what triggers that. I would anticipate that this would be a similar sort of application.
It very well may be.
Yeah. All right. Thanks.
So just battery storage. I mean, how do we even get to this point? Why is it such an important topic? Certainly, it starts out with PV arrays being constructed at school sites, and it was interesting that when the PV arrays first started arriving at school sites and other sites, certainly in California, I won't speak for the nation, the suppliers, the contractors and suppliers and engineering and architectural community weren't on the same page at all. There was really nothing in the code that clearly described how we're going to handle photovoltaic systems, especially when you look at carports and structures like that. And so DSA actually formed a task force some years ago and wrote an IR that at the time was adopted certainly by local jurisdictions throughout California, like City of Los Angeles and other cities, because they had no codes to turn to. And then the DSA IR was actually used to develop model code language about dealing with PV arrays. And we see the similar situation happening with battery storage, that there is not really specific structural codes that describe this. The fire life safety codes were actually fairly weak. George would tell you, 2016 code basically didn't even know that these things existed or would exist. The 2019 code basically says don't mess it up. And the 2022 code now provides some specificity, as George just went over. And look, this is rigorous specificity. So the fire codes recognize these as being potentially very much a hazardous condition. So we, DSA, we started seeing some battery storage, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe, coming along with some of the PV structures, and they were about the size of a refrigerator, standard refrigerator size. And then a couple of years ago, we started seeing a rather large battery storage, more of the cargo container or shipping container size, and not very many of them. And we basically treated these as a black box that kind of like we do with large mechanical equipment, like a chiller or something like that. We don't look inside the chiller to see what's going on. We just make sure it's anchored down. So more became known about these battery storages, and more questions started getting asked, and we started seeing more projects. And so the community college group in the state of California approached DSA with concern that we were inconsistent on our plan reviews, making inconsistent demands, requirements, or whatever we want to say about it. And the designers of these systems were unsure how to successfully push a project through DSA. And they were kind of guessing at what they were doing, and they were just basically butting their heads against the wall. That's what they felt like. So a group got together, and Fred Diamond was part of that group, and we had a large discussion about what to do about this concern from the community colleges. And we decided that that yes, we were inconsistent on our approach, and we decided that the providers of these battery storage systems were inconsistent on their knowledge of the codes. And we decided to pull all the projects into one office. We decided to bring them into the San Diego office and put a single plan reviewer for structural safety and a single plan reviewer for fire life safety in responsible charge of reviewing these projects as they were coming in, so that we were consistent and we could use their plan review comments and their research into the code requirements to start developing an IR. So we, some of the conversations we've had are about cargo containers. For some reason, everyone's fixated on cargo containers for this battery storage. And DSA already has an IR out about how to present a cargo container for school use that DSA is going to accept. And I would tell you that it's very difficult, in my opinion, to have a cargo container approved by DSA. And the reasons are that the cargo containers are manufactured by various people throughout the world. The cargo containers come in various states of condition, or disrepair or not disrepair. And the structural performance of the cargo containers isn't really recognized by the California building codes. It's by U.S. Coast Guard or some other entity, ISO people. And it's more of an international standard. But when you start cutting holes in cargo containers to put in doors, vents, and everything else, the structural system becomes unknown. So, and then you get into the concept of what are the materials? Who verified that the steel is what they say the steel is, that the welds are really there, and on and on and on. So DSA some years ago developed an IR for cargo containers. And if you just want to have a one-off cargo container, in my opinion, it's like, don't bother. Just go weld up a bunch of tube steel and make your own cargo container that everyone knows everything about. But we, so we already know about cargo containers. And so our IR that we're developing says, if you want to use a cargo container, go see this other IR. But basically, where we are today is that we've processed about 6 projects through San Diego office. Basically, the projects are incomplete. They do not one project yet completely covers George's 10 points. The code requires 10 submittal items, and George went through them. Nobody's given us those 10 submittal items yet. We've seen a couple one cargo containers, Tesla, Megapack 2s, even the Tesla stuff doesn't actually, the designers haven't given us the 10 points that they're required to. And so we've developed basically the beginnings of an IR, which is a very long shopping list of here's all the structural stuff you need to address, and here's all the fire life safety items you need to address. We believe that we fully have described structural and fire life safety, and we are now taking those plan review comments, if you will, and packaging them into the IR format. So we should have a draft IR out, I'm thinking like in about a week or so. And that way everyone understands the rules of engagement. It's interesting, the fire life safety rules of engagement for DSA are very well described in the California Fire Code in Chapter 12. So the IR for the fire life safety aspects is really just code citations. By the way, make sure to address this code, that code, this code, that code. There's nothing unique that DSA has necessarily put down for a fire life safety. Structural, there's nothing that really describes structural systems for cargo, or not for cargo containers, but for battery storage. So there's a few things that we needed to address. One is that we decided that these are risk category 4. And so in the world of structural engineering for seismic loads, there's 4 risk categories. Risk category 1 is like a chicken coop, I guess, right? It's an agricultural building that's not really being occupied by people. Risk category 2 is low occupancy buildings like your house and a standard office building being built in California. Risk category 3 starts getting into most school buildings because of number of occupants. And then risk category 4 is those facilities that are storing hazardous materials or must remain operational after a large seismic event. So certainly these battery storage systems, we already saw how the fire life safety code's treating them, and the companion concern in the structural codes would be risk category 4. In addition to this, that we have basically written to whoever wants to design this and the IR that's coming out that there's 2 ways to design these types of structures. One is just conventional design, like we design all of the buildings using conventional structural engineering models and techniques and mathematics. And the other is to take the entire unit, if you will, and put it on a shake table and then shake it up to simulate earthquakes with all the elements in place. It doesn't have to be the exact batteries, but it has to be similar size and weights and on the storage racks. And if these structures pass the shake table test, then you don't need to give us any calculations for the structure at all. We know that it's constructed and it's going to survive an earthquake. The other thing that we've established is that all the tests and inspections that we appreciate for every other school building still are in effect for these battery storage structures. And just because you pass a shake table test doesn't mean that the next unit you're constructing has the same quality of welds and materials. And so it's important that these are inspected as part of the construction. So that's where we are now. I think that we actually are ahead of the curve. And by the way, DSA has approved many of these storage systems by treating the container, whatever it is, as a black box. And so there's been some conversation of, oh, what about the ones that we've already approved? And it's like, well, yeah, welcome to the real world that we all live in, right? That just because maybe you discover something new doesn't mean you keep doing something the old way. Instead, you switch to the new way and you move on in life. So certainly, I don't think anything rises to the occasion of trying to determine statewide what's been built, what hasn't been built, and what code it is or isn't compliant with, and especially in the fire life safety world when the older codes didn't adequately describe the fire life safety concerns as they do today. That's a recap of it. It'll be interesting to see how the community reacts once they see our IR. We've already sent it to a lot of the players in the world of battery storage. Not that it's an IR, but the content has been released because these people are in the middle of designing right now and they need to see the content. And so we're starting to get a little bit of feedback. Has been no pushback yet. Instead, it's been more like questions. Well, if we do a shake table test, you know, do we have to put the exact batteries in? Those types of questions. It looks like that manufacturers that want to use the box type approach, if you will, like a mechanical equipment unit, are kind of fixating on a shake table. We've been told, we haven't seen this actually in writing, we've asked for it, that the Tesla battery, mega battery pack 2, or whatever Tesla calls their cargo container size unit, actually has a shake table test that they shake tabled for risk category 4. And so we've asked to see that actual shake table test and its results. So it could be that Tesla already understood a lot of this stuff and they may be ahead of the curve. Any questions? Well, it must have been just a stellar explanation. Yeah, Laura.
I have one quick one. Will there be any tolerance for deferred approvals or how, because I expect that there'll be a lot of differences among the manufacturers and we might need to wait and see who we're getting on some of our projects?
We have not discussed that. What we're seeing are standalone projects that is the project. And so if the project is a battery storage, it seems like that the box, if you will, already is defined. There's already a manufacturer selected. I would think if it's a very large project like a new high school campus and we're going to do battery storage over here, it would only make sense to defer it.
Yeah, that's the ones I'm looking at is brand new campuses that are, we're sizing it for the entire campus and it's significant, right? So.
Sure. It only makes sense to do a deferred submittal on that. The other interesting thing that I started thinking about a couple of days ago is George mentioned the outdoor exposure near and far. And so we're going to build something 100 feet away. We're going to put a battery pack in at 100 feet away. And then what does that look like in 5 years from now when the school wants to build another building? Typically, if you have an existing building, you want to build a new one next to it. It's the new building that you perhaps increase the fire ratings of the walls or something like that. But if you have a battery storage and you've exceeded the maximum quantities for near source and you put something close to it, you've got to go back and rework the battery system, battery storage, not the new building. And So we're thinking about requiring a mandatory pre-application meeting with anyone that wants to put a battery storage project on a school campus to make sure that the school understands future limitations and perhaps future problems, to make sure the school understands that there is a decommissioning plan and a commissioning plan. We're concerned, like we see with the PV industry, that people go bankrupt or otherwise their business cease to exist, and they built a battery storage on your campus. What are you going to do now when it's time to decommission it? So we are thinking a mandatory pre-application meeting so that the owners, the school districts are actually understanding the I don't know, the importance or dangers of these things, or so that they make good decisions now that they can live with in the future. I was at some meetings and there was a conversation with K through 12 groups of people, and the conversations really were, and I wasn't involved in these, I was just a bystander listening, but it was, are these even appropriate to put like on an elementary school campus? There's concern that it just may not be appropriate. I don't know. I think there's going to be a little bit of a tug of war between energy codes and energy requirements and you know, how to deal with these things, especially when you have a small campus like an elementary school campus. Any other questions? Thank you. I very much appreciate it.
I believe
Yes.
Tenjeet had her hand up, Craig.
Yeah, I just had a
I'm
quick
sorry.
follow-up.
I can see like not much on my computer here, and I'm not good about seeing hands sticking up. So sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I just had a quick follow-up on lines of what Laura mentioned. Given when we would be submitting to DSA, we really would not be knowing exactly who the manufacturer is. So something addressing a seismic anchorage in the IR would be helpful for the design community. And also wondering if there was any outreach or research done related to who the manufacturers are or what the typical units look like while developing the IR.
Yeah, we kind of made an attempt at that, and we invited participants, and I think that this sense of urgency overrode the ability of the participants to join the group. And so we developed the IR because it couldn't wait. And so now that the IR is close to being developed, we'll send that out. But we also sent it to the groups that were submitting projects to us that included the designers and the manufacturers. So that group has the information. We haven't really recorded who all those people are. So it's out in the industry, but the need to get something written down was more urgent than I think the industry was able to react to in order to put people on our task force. And like I said, it's almost just a code regurgitation anyway, other than some of the structural requirements, which is really a code regurgitation is, yeah, your structure has to comply with the California Building Code. And here's how it can. Here's a couple of ways to do it. I don't think there's anything in there that DSA just dreamed up and, oh, that's a good idea, other than maybe a mandatory pre-submittal meeting with DSA.
Yeah, we should be distinct about deferred submittals, because what we're talking about for deferred submittals is the campus-wide big storage units. When we look at a 30,000 square foot building, it's going to need a couple Tesla mega packs. So we're not going to defer these kind of small campus installs that are going to go within the building itself. That would be kind of my general thought process. And Laura, generally our office, we prefer deferred submittals for something like, or I should say increments. for something like that because they tend to get scheduled and everybody plans a little bit better?
Yeah, I think as long as it's clear, so we know
Yeah.
what we're doing, I think either certainly works for all of us, I think.
Yeah, like I said, the projects we're seeing now are in and of itself battery storage. They're not connected with anything larger. And so if you start connecting them with something else, like a new building or a new campus, then perhaps the deferred submittal route's the correct route to go as manufacturers being selected. Also, we haven't seen yet a dedicated use building. We believe a community college here in the San Diego area is getting ready to submit a dedicated use building. We've talked to them about it. Looks like it'd be concrete masonry, steel roof, right? All the non-combustible stuff George talked about. And we have not yet seen a mixed use building where they're trying to put large battery storage in a building that's being used for other purposes. So certainly we'll start seeing how these things shake out as the future approaches us. Interesting thing, a couple of things George didn't necessarily talk about is that these can't be like very far up in the air, right? They can't be like on the third floor of a building or something. And they strictly cannot be vaults in the ground either, unless there's some other things about vaults. But we may, I'm thinking, especially on small campuses, we may start seeing vaults being more developed to accept battery storage. It kind of makes sense to me. And so we need to start exploring that concept before we start seeing it, so we know how to react to that. So Fred, I do believe that, you know, DSA listened, right? We jumped on this.
Craig, I just put my hand up and I wanted to say that you did an absolutely phenomenal job of herding the cats.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, the storage option where it's associated with a new building, you're probably going to see some of that after January 1st. That's my guess. And the folks that are, you know, they know what's coming up in the new code cycle. And especially for the campuses that have had power issues, primarily up in the PG&E area, I can tell you that there isn't a community college out there that wants to be an example of what happened over at Moss Landing. Nobody wants that. And I think what they did is they actually reached out to some of the manufacturers and the other designers who probably didn't have a thorough knowledge of how the process works, and not knowing how inspection and testing works and the metallurgical properties that have to be accounted for and all that kind of good stuff. And honestly, Craig, after you got done explaining all of that, I think their heads were spinning a little bit. And I can tell you right in front of Ida that you did a great job. And as always, we're always concerned about fire and life safety, and you did a great job at doing that. And I can't wait to see all of the IRs coming out. And I think that's really what they need so that they can sit down and decipher, here's what all the variables are in the equation. And then that way they can come and get something that would actually work for everyone. Good job.
Thanks, Fred. And you know what? And that's what I heard. I heard is that we want all the rules written down so we can comply with them, so we don't have to guess.
That's right.
I didn't hear anyone complaining, not yet, about the rules. They just want to know what the rules are. It's like, tell us what the rules are, for God's sake, and we'll go follow them. That's what I heard.
I think they were looking at it like, you know, the black box. It's not a school building. It's disassociated with the school. And that's what probably led them off. Going off on a tangent.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because the state of California adopts the California Fire Code. And so the local jurisdictions, they should be asking for all this gory information, just like DSA does. This is not school specific. So I think the industries, if the local jurisdictions actually understand what's going on, I think that the battery industries going to have to step up their game a little bit and get this figured out.
Yeah, and one thing that we're going to try to get everyone to do also is part of their due diligence. A lot of the owners don't think about doing a preliminary code review prior to. and thinking about how is this going to be implemented with all of our upcoming buildings like you talked about. I can only think of a couple campuses out there that have enough acreage to put something 100 feet away where it wouldn't be impacted by a new build out later. And most of those are up in the north. You know, one of them has a PV system that it actually produces enough power to power up their entire facility. And I don't know if they have any battery storage yet. So that's all going to be upcoming. And again, you know, the community colleges want to do nothing but work with you guys, and you did a great job, Craig.
Yeah, thank you, Fred. Appreciate that.
Yeah, Fred, this is George. I think just to pony on, I think one of the differences for the local community and even ourselves is once they start realizing that this is an energy code directive for starting in 2022, that you now have to incorporate battery storage. You know, I think the locals will be playing catch up just like everybody else.
I wouldn't be surprised, just like with the PV system, if they tag on to our IR and start using it, or might use it as a basis to build their own requirements from. But wouldn't surprise me. It's happened before.
I'll make a prediction that Doug will probably see some from us later. Seems how we have a new bond.
Like I said, everything's coming into San Diego right now. Once we have the IR published, then there's no reason to bring everything into San Diego, right? A single source, because we all will see the rules together, our requirements or procedures or process, whatever we want to call them. Everyone will understand together. I also want to say that, we have Rich and Chris in Oakland on the team, and Ron and this guy Pete Carlson in my office on the team. And between the four of those guys, and then George and Danielle Trubant from Fire Life Safety, so between the six of them, I mean, we put the all-star team out there to get this on. So yeah, and those guys just, they all know what they're doing to a person and are like overly competent people. So I just kind of like get out of the way.
We have a question by Doug also, Craig, or hand raise.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that what Craig said about that San Diego is going to handle them. You will actually still submit your application to whatever regional office you're working on, and then we will internally move it down to Craig's office. But you're still going to submit to the regional office that you're working under.
Yeah, and this won't be for much longer. The faster I can not take stuff like this in, the happier I'm going to be. So there's motivation here to get the IR out on the street. Also, I just want to mention, because I just want to throw it out to George, a kudo is, George was already ahead of this game. George Barnes, our fire life safety principal, he was. I don't know, for some reason he must have had his crystal ball out. So he was ahead of the curve, I think, ahead of all of us. All right, is that enough? What's next? Gilbert?
Thank you very much, Craig. Very fascinating work. And I'll update the group. I'll work with you, Craig, to update the group on the draft IRs and let them know when that draft is coming up. Next up, we have a small break here. I'm thinking maybe 10 to 15 minutes, if that's okay with the group. It's 10:50, 10:49 really. But would you all like to come back at 11 on the dot? Maybe get some coffee, stretch your legs, and round out the hours of this PSCC meeting for today. Yeah, okay. Well, then we'll see each other 11 o'clock, if that's okay. Just feel free to turn your cameras off, stay logged on, and yeah, take a break. Thanks. Welcome back, everyone. About 30 seconds left in our break here. Wanted to thank everyone again for your time. I know time is very valuable, and appreciate you being here today, taking the time, your morning really, to help us out and collaborate together.
A belated welcome aboard also, Gilbert.
Thanks, Fred. Okay, so it's 11 o'clock, last hour here, rounding it out. I'm going to pass things over to Eric, where he will briefly cover a little bit from battery storage where we left off, and he'll segue into his topics for the agenda.
Thanks, Gilbert. Yeah, so we've got like an hour to go, probably a little behind schedule. So we'll in the remainder of our presentations, we'll try to pick up the pace a bit to give adequate time at the end for any administrative and round robin comments by the collaborative. But to tag on to the end of our discussion prior to the break, we do as part of the segue into battery storage. I mentioned that these are we're seeing more because of the Energy Commission's upcoming adoption, or it's already adopted, but enforcement of the new energy code as part of the 2022 building standards. And obviously the battery storage systems that we are seeing now currently are by choice, right? And they're by choice to provide backup power for campuses. And so certainly those are larger. Maybe they're for planned shutdowns by the local utility and trying to minimize the impact to school campuses. But again, the Energy Commission is, and we will be enforcing, not through specific code review, but through the submission of plans enforcing battery storage as part of the Title 24 documentation. So I have Paul with us here today, and he'll talk to you a little bit about the energy code requirements related to battery storage that we are going to be seeing in the 2022 energy code.
Yeah, so I'll cover this quickly. If you have questions, feel free to ask them at the end, or if you're more in depth, feel free to send me an email or call, and I can help guide through this. But really, so the 2022 code is going to require PV panels on every building. And there's some exceptions to that. The way the Energy Commission worded it is that every new building is required to have PV, photovoltaic, on the building or part of the project, whether it's on a ground mount system or rooftop. And so there's some exceptions to that. And then when we get to battery storage, every building that's required that doesn't meet one of the exceptions for PV is also required to have battery storage. Now, there's some exceptions to that. So the exceptions are if number one, if you don't add PV, you don't have to do batteries. Number two, any system rated less than 10 kilowatt hours, or any system that would require a battery less than 10 kilowatt hours isn't required to be installed. And then any building less than 5,000 square feet also doesn't have to have battery, isn't required to have batteries installed. Now, I did some preliminary calculations. It would seem for most schools, now again, this is preliminary, that you're looking at about 15,000 square foot building, and smaller are likely not going to need battery storage. So that's a rough number. There's a lot that goes into it, a lot of calculations. And for the sake of time, I won't share those. But that really is in a nutshell of what's required, when it's required. And so if there's any questions, I can answer those. Yeah, Doug.
Just this morning, I got an inquiry from a school district to see if the collector storage could be and I've forgotten the term that they use, but apparently, say a district were to build a large photovoltaic array on one campus, could they transfer these requirements from another campus to within their district to a central array as long as they had the same required amount?
So the way that the Energy Commission has worded the requirement, and when we've asked them, the answer is no. So Eric and I were just talking about that a few minutes ago, maybe trying to work with them for the next code cycle to do something. Because I know there's some campuses, specifically in Bakersfield, that are doing a microgrid type system. Not to meet the specific energy code, but just to be more environmentally friendly, where they have one facility will have generation, one facility will have storage, things like that. So currently there's nothing in the code that will allow that to happen, but I think it's a good idea and we should look into it with the Energy Commission. So.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Laura.
Yeah, I just was kind of wondering how we apply that to new campuses. Are we really going to apply building by building by building instead of, say, calculating the energy storage on the whole campus demand and the solar on the whole campus demand?
So I'll speak to that a little bit, Laura.
Okay.
We've had a number of meetings with the Energy Commission, and I will say that the way that the code was written and that their apparent consideration was based upon the module of a building. And so there isn't specific language that would support doing an overall analysis of the campus. And that can either work to your benefit or to your detriment, I suppose, depending on the Title 24 calculations in your energy budget. But one way that it, and a very pointed question was asked of them, one way that it would work to a campus's benefit is if you were placing multiple modular buildings on an existing campus, for instance, the calculations, depending again on your climate zone, suggest that a 960 square foot modular building would not trigger, as a module, would not trigger any PV requirement. And that by repeating that module, you would thus not, as a sum, need to add PV and thus battery storage as part of that larger installation. So, and just to make a point, we really exaggerated the possibility of, say, the question was, what if someone was to place 20 960 square foot modular buildings? And the answer was definitively, it's each building would not trigger PVs. So while it does not seem to make sense from an energy consumption standpoint, the Energy Commission does seem to be consistent in their interpretation that a building is a building, and that is the module that the code was written on. And so to circle back to your question, a campus would be the sum total of each of the individual buildings' requirements.
So we'll be calculating battery storage and everything on a building by building basis. We can aggregate them in one location or one unit, but it'll be on a building by building basis.
Correct. And that's in part because each building has its own Title 24 calculation that it's tied to, right? And energy budget that it's tied to. So that's really the logic behind it all. And it's not considered in a campus setting.
Thank you.
Great questions, by the way, because we were having these exact conversations offline while the other presentations were going on too. But okay, Laura, your hand's still up. I don't see any other hands, so in the interest of time, we'll move on. I'm going to bring up Gilbert, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have the Cal Green presentation that is next on the agenda, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So I'll just go through this thing. Pardon me while I work with one screen. Let me share. Okay, rather than going through a presentation, because there seems to be some recordings that are part of this, I'll just have it in the in this view mode. Skip past this. We're going to jump to our Cal Green presentation. Our sustainability team consists of Ida Claire, of course, myself, Michelle Golden, who's not here today, Paul Johnson, Tab Cummins, who's our senior mechanical engineer, and I need to always make sure I mention Jessica and Katie, who do a huge amount of work behind the scenes for almost everything that we do on the sustainability team. I will highlight that, as I mentioned, we're in this sort of mode of needing to hire folks. Katie's last day will be tomorrow, so she will not be with us, and we'll be advertising for a new AGPA position. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll get somebody that is even half as qualified as Katie, because she does an immense amount for us. So I'll skip past some of these intervening or intermediate slides. Again, Paul's here to talk a bit about the EV requirements. I will say that we are going to be requiring charging to be indicated on the plans that are submitted. Shade trees already are required as part of that submittal, as is EV charging when it's provided. There'll be some carbon reduction requirements that are being proposed in the intervening cycle that will be ultimately required to be submitted with your plan sets. And currently there is CO2 monitoring that is required, but in the intervening cycle, that too is being expanded to alterations of buildings containing classrooms. So with electric vehicle charging, I'll have Paul take over the requirements.
Okay, so in 2012, Governor Brown issued a goal, or set a goal, to have 1 million zero emission vehicles on the road by 2020. And then when that goal was achieved in 2020, Governor Newsom set a goal to have 100% of in-state sales of passenger cars and trucks to be zero emission by 2035. And so with the addition, or with other directives, DSA has taken that to heart. And so for 2022 code that will become standard in January, EV chargers will be required at new construction, at all new school construction sites. And so we've taken that further, and in the intervening cycle, which will be July 2024, we will actually be requiring chargers at existing facilities for existing projects. So this first slide is some of the definitions that we have. So we're going to allow level 1 EV charging receptacles on school campuses, as well as low power level 2. And then we made some definition changes to electric vehicle supply equipment. So we've also changed some of the exceptions. We recognize that it could be difficult to get EV chargers into some parking facilities. And so we've changed some of the exceptions. And so this is going to be school specific. And so with the concurrence of the Division of the State Architect, compliance with this section, so this is the EV charging section, can be waived or modified. And so the big exception to that is the last one, where the installation of EVCS is impractical. So where if you have a remote parking lot, if you have something going on where you're like it's going to be very cost prohibitive to meet this requirement, come to us, talk to us. We'll we'll work with you on figuring out a solution or the best solution for the campus and for the budget. So, we've also added so currently in the code that will become enforced or be enforced in January, it's based on how many spaces the parking lot has, is how many total EV chargers are required to be installed. We're going to add an alternative method or another means of compliance, which will be based on KVA for the amount of spaces you have. And so you can see on the right, for 0 to 9 spaces, you have 0 KVA is required to be installed. 10 to 25 spaces, 8 KVA of charging is required to be installed. Now this charging can be met in a multitude of different ways. You can do level 1, level 2, low level 2, or level 2. And so you'll take the amount of charging or amount of KVA, which is the power supplied to the charger, and add that together. And so if you have one charger that provides 8 KVA, all you have to supply is one charger. But if the campus wants to supply a bunch of level one chargers, plug-in receptacles, then you'd have to install more. And so we feel like this is a better way for our campuses who have students that one level 2 charger on campus isn't going to probably cut it. They're going to need to do more charging to meet the demands of more people. Additionally, students and teachers are parked 6-8 hours a day. So this lower level of charging will better facilitate getting more people to charge. We're providing more chargers. So this is the big change, is we're going to require for additions and alterations, parking facilities need to provide EVCS or chargers. And so these alterations shall be provided in accordance with the number indicated in the tables. We showed you one of the tables. And when the scope of work includes an increase in power supply to the electric panel, serving the light fixtures illuminating the parking area, or when areas containing parking spaces are added to the parking facility, or then the number of required EVCS shall be based on the total number of existing and new parking spaces in the parking facility. So that's pretty much saying, hey, if you're doing a panel upgrade to the panel, the electrical panel that provides power to the parking lot, you have to provide some charging in that parking lot. Or if you're adding new parking. So if you're adding a new parking lot, if you're adding new spaces to the parking lot, whatever that is, charges are also required. And then alterations consisted of the installation of photovoltaic systems in the parking lot. So if you're providing EV or PV in the parking lot, it doesn't feel like a big reach to require that chargers are also installed. And then this is, so for a limited time, we had EV capable spaces where we required panel capacity and infrastructure conduit to be provided to the parking lot. If you're bringing in a project, whatever part of the project for that school, and you have these EV capable spaces, you're then required to bring those EV capable spaces or bring chargers to those spaces. So this shouldn't be a big ask. The panel capacity should be there. The conduit should be there, providing wire and the chargers themselves. So I think the big thing that we get out of this new code or these new code proposals is there's not going to be a heavy burden on the schools to provide level 1 or low level 2 charging. It doesn't take the electrical infrastructure, the high electrical infrastructure and electrical upgrades that providing a level 2 or even a DCSC, or some people call it a level 3, would require. So we feel like this will be a lot easier on the schools to achieve, and it will provide more charging to them. So
I want to be clear on these requirements that we've just shown you. Those are in proposals for the intervening code cycle that will become effective July of 2024. Obviously, there's still public input, as was mentioned by Diane Gould earlier. through the Code Advisory Commission. These are the proposals that are going to move forward in 2 days to the Building Standards Commission. So I just want to be clear that these aren't going to be required as of January. The requirements of as of January do require new chargers to be installed. DSA co-adopted with with PSC the non-res standards for the 2022 triennial code, and the requirements for new chargers in new facilities can be found in the non-res sections. So before we go on, let's maybe pause to see if there are any questions.
I see no hands.
Okay, well then I will go back to Sharon and we'll move on. So again, the proposals that you're going to see for carbon reduction are the proposals for the intervening cycle that will become effective, if adopted, become effective July 1 of 2024. So for the first time, California is going to be requiring some requirements for carbon reduction in construction projects. This is brought on by various executive orders, B3015, B5518, relating to statewide carbon neutrality by 2045, and then N1919, which required state government to redouble its efforts. PSC and DSA, as well as HCD, participated in a collaborative, much like this one, that was focused primarily on new code proposals for carbon reduction. The workshops were held publicly on April 4th, May 10th, June 30th, September 30th, and our submittals again were submitted to Finance and Legal Services on October 25th, and ultimately will be forwarded to BSC for their review prior to the Code Advisory Committee meetings on December 1st. But the collaborative was pretty far-reaching and invited industry partners, agency partners, including CARB and concrete and steel industry, to collaborate on the final requirements. Ultimately, I feel what's being put forth, and we've received pretty good feedback that what's being put forth is a good collaborative effort by all parties. So some of the definitions, it's important to baseline vernacular when talking about new code proposals. So if you're not familiar with some of those, we have these definitions in front of you: whole building life cycle. These are topics that have been around for a while, so you're probably at least somewhat familiar with the terms. But cradle to gate is the activities associated with product or building's life cycle from extraction through production. Cradle to grave takes into account those activities plus disposal. Global warming potential measures against CO2, an equivalent unit of CO2. And then an EPD is a document that basically stipulates that particular product's impact on the environment. And it's a primary document for indicating and capturing what the total environmental impact is on a project based upon the individual EPDs. The carbon reduction proposals will be applied to alterations and addition projects as well as new construction that has an aggregate area of 50,000 square feet or greater. And those alterations need to choose one of three possible routes to compliance. The first is building reuse. So you can, if you have an existing building that you're going to reuse a minimum of 45% of, the primary structural elements, and the enclosure, then that in and of itself will make the project compliant. The idea is that you're reducing the total new carbon introduced to that facility by maintaining and reusing what's already there, and thereby not adding to the embodied carbon of that project. There's also the whole building life cycle assessment, which is more of a performance basis, and it takes into consideration all the products that go into a particular project, and then calculates the whole building life cycle based upon all of the sum total of all of those products. Then the last possible path to compliance is through a prescriptive method, and it's the GWP compliance. And that specific products need to comply with the requirements for the prescriptive product GWP performance listings for steel, rebar, flat glass insulation, and those are taken from the Buy Clean California Act, but we've also added concrete to the mix. Concrete was excluded from the Buy Clean California, but through our collaborative efforts with the concrete industry, we feel we've provided a good requirement for concrete, which includes the ability for that material to meet compliance through a weighted average calculation. I'll stop there and pause again for questions. This is a new topic, so you may have a number of questions, but I'll pause there. So either you're overwhelmed, extremely adept at carbon reduction, or we covered it adequately. No questions?
I just want to add, Eric, if that's okay, that, you may be looking at this and really your design professionals, most of them know how to do this already. A lot of the software is free. And on buildings that are 50,000 square feet or greater, the process to do a whole building life cycle analysis or meet compliance by showing compliance in the documents will not contribute significantly to design fees. It's estimated then less than half of 1% of design fees would be attributed to this type of documentation. So I want to reassure everyone that this is really something that has been in the process for a while, that will be coming because of our climate change, our climate action goals for the state, but also just climate action responsibility that we have nationwide, each one of us, to address these issues. And so this is really an introduction that's kind of dipping our toe in the water for really large projects, encouraging building reuse when we can, and addressing and just becoming conscious and aware of how much carbon exists in our construction projects. So thank you. Rich, you have a question?
Yeah, for the 45% reuse, how do we measure the 45%? Is that by mass, by embodied energy? I mean, what are we?
It's measured by retaining approximately, is it 45% of the existing structure, Eric, and 45% of the building envelope?
Correct, and that would be by mass, Richard.
Okay.
Carbon content.
Thank you.
Angie?
Yeah, so the whole building LCA, if that is a requirement on buildings of certain size, Ida, you mentioned, the additional fee required to do that type of work on projects. I have a related question on, would there be a specification on who actually performs that? It can be a structural engineer can do that or an architect can perform that. Would there be a requirement on which design professional performs that work and who actually reviews that, the whole building LCA report? Will DSA be reviewing that on projects? And is there sufficient training on DSA's side to review that work?
So, Eric, if you don't mind if I answer this question.
Sure, go ahead.
So we've been working on templates that would be demonstrated compliance. First, to answer your first question, we don't limit who will be doing the work. Whoever wants to do the work can do that work. There will be part of the compliance sheets or statements that need to be filled out and put on the drawings. There is a design professional statement that they need to sign that they've met the requirements. But if you're if you're going through building reuse, if that's your choice, because you are reusing an existing building, there's one sheet that just demonstrates the calculations. We'd be looking that the calculations are filled out and that the bottom line actually meets that 45%. Fairly simple. Whole building life cycle analysis, we'd be asking for a report in the drawings. We just check to see again, that it meets the requirements for that whole building reduction in global warming potential for those elements. The prescriptive path method, we'd be looking for EPDs and that demonstrate the limits that are met. And if it's the weighted calculation just for concrete, if that's the path that the designer chose, that the calculations included. So we will be providing training. Our goal really, again, is to introduce these concepts in a code format to have designers become more aware of what they're specifying and the products that are available out there that contribute to, that have global warming potential limits. Most products now have many EPDs. Also, this process encourages other manufacturers who don't have EPDs to be competitive and to get EPDs so that we all become more aware. And this is a statewide effort. Obviously, ours is responsive to schools, but it is for all non-residential buildings in California that meet this 50,000 square foot threshold. And our partnership is with AIA California in developing training, of course, for other disciplines, structural engineers, civil engineers. We would love to partner with other industry groups to develop training as well. And our plan as well is for schools to create training on our DSA LMS to also provide ease in that compliance. But the forms are indicated to especially try to address it in a simplified manner for inclusion. So limited review, but creating awareness and ensuring that it advances. Thank you.
Benji, there are also free software applications that are available for whole building life cycle. Some of those are actually listed in the express terms. So we feel that we've tried to go a long way to making it as least impactful financially for owners to comply. Additionally, I will say the limits on the prescriptive side are significantly low. The focus on this first and readily achievable by most products. The emphasis on this first round, as I mentioned, is to introduce folks to the process who may not have gone through the process. I think most design professionals, Laura may be able to attest to this too, that most design professionals have been doing this for some time. And it won't be new to them. It might be new to some facility owners though. And so having the readily achievable carbon limits in the prescriptive paths made great sense and was one of the best recommendations that we had.
Yeah, thank you for the response. And we have been performing whole building LCA on different projects, but not just in the community college space with DSA. So that's why the question about additional requirements that would come in when we perform it on DSA projects. So thank you for the response.
So I don't see any other hands raised, so I'll go ahead and go back to sharing. Just a quick time check. We're at what, 11:34 now, so I probably should pick up the pace. I believe we have accessibility to get through too. Next up on our list was CO2 monitoring. You'll note that in the upcoming 2022, that CO2 monitoring is going to be required in new classrooms, and that the requirements are based upon Senate Bill 840, which set the timeline in statute to have CO2 monitors installed in new classrooms. Sorry, I need to move this out of my way so I can see. And that those monitors be visible to the teacher, and that further systems with demand control ventilation tied to an EMS system need to be regularly monitored by facility personnel. And more specifically, it says each K-12 school classroom shall be equipped with carbon dioxide monitors that need to meet these 4 requirements. And so they're generally there in front of you, but tamper-proof, measure a minimum of at 15-minute intervals, and record those for 30 days, and need to measure at levels between the range of 400 parts per million and 2,000 parts per million or greater, and that they are certified by the manufacturer to be accurate within 75 parts per million at 1,000 parts per million, and require calibration no more than 5 years. So those are some specific requirements. The monitor, if it's tied to an EMS control system, then the sensor in the classroom is not required to have a display, but it needs to be regularly monitored as previously stated. And the sensor in the classroom is not required to provide any indicator when notification is provided to that facility personnel. If it's not tied to an EMS, the column on the left, the monitor must display the carbon dioxide readings on the device in the classroom, and the monitor shall have a visual indicator on the device for when the carbon dioxide values have exceeded 1,100 parts per million. So those are the requirements in general that will become effective January 1, 2023. We've been talking a bit about the intervening code cycle, and so as part of the proposals for the intervening code cycle, which would become effective, excuse me, that's a bit of a repeat, that would become effective in, sorry, I'm going to make a real-time edit right there, would become effective July 1, 2024, would be to take those same requirements and apply them to alterations to an existing classroom, and alterations to a building containing classrooms as well. So the proposal is to expand the same new construction requirements to alterations that of buildings that contain classrooms. The effort really is to make classrooms more healthy for our students moving forward. So with that is the end of the CalGreen submission, or presentation. We do have an email that you can send additional questions or comments to, and it's DSA/SSCalGreen at dgs.gov.ca.gov. So that email is on your screen, and it's again DSA/SSCalGreen at dgs.ca.gov. You can always send your comments or questions either to Gilbert, as previously mentioned, or if it's specific to CalGreen, you can send them to this email address as well. So any questions on CO2 monitoring? Richard.
Yeah, Eric, have we made any progress on operable windows and accessibility. That's been a long time killer for CO2 in classrooms. And
Yeah.
I mean, we've got to do something about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Michelle Davis, who's walking by right there, in the window, she, our new senior architect for accessibility, she has been, championing with, the modular building industry, trying to determine, manufacturers' existing hardware systems and to what level they might be compliant. We recognize that operable windows may not have accessible hardware and thus might be a challenge for projects to comply. DSA has added the requirement to submit at least performance metrics or a cut sheet of some sort on project submittals as part of our DSA 3. And that update was made approximately 6 months ago, I think now. And we have not yet started to see the fruits of that, but we are continuing to work on how window manufacturers currently are compliant. We of course don't certify hardware, nor do we have plans to certify either door or window hardware, but at least having a better understanding of ways that window manufacturers are currently compliant or not compliant is a goal.
So just to add a little bit, if I may, Eric, on that, we know this has been an issue for a while, but I will say that many of the modular building manufacturers do not use a commercial type window. They use more residential type windows in their units. Residential type windows, if you're looking at the code in residences, they're actually excluded from accessibility requirements. So this is not an issue that we can just wave away. In its use and where it's required, accessibility is required for the window. It really is up to our modular building manufacturers as well to demand that from their window suppliers, that access is provided. And it's also up to the clients and the design professionals to encourage as well that windows be included for these healthy reasons. The demand is generally what starts to create the change. And so we have a role, but it's not necessarily only our issue to solve, it's all of our issues to solve because it is a federal requirement that access is provided and we can't just waive it because it's hard to find a window that's accessible when the modular manufacturers don't really try to push the issue with their suppliers as well. So we're working on it, but it is a bit of a pickle. Thanks.
I see no more hands raised. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. I think we're sort of down the stretch here. And we're moving on, if I'm correct, Gilbert, to the accessibility portion, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. This one I don't believe has animations. So again, we're here at the 2022 collaborative. I'll go over the DSA access team, some of the 2022 code updates, and I'll try to go over those pretty quickly. Those have been out since July and will be applicable in January. So I'm assuming that most people have had a chance to at least review the updates, and they're not significant either. I'll skip over quickly the adoption schedule since Diane adequately covered it earlier, and then we'll go into our 2022 intervening code proposals, and those will be handled in brief too. So I think we're going to be able to make it. We'll get down to Q&A and then hand it back to Gilbert. So again, the team, Etta Claire, of course, myself, Derek Shaw, supervising architect for access compliance, Michelle Davis, who you met earlier. We are still in search of a senior architect task technical advisor. So if you happen to know an architect who's experienced and is a CASP, please let me know. I'd love I'd love to extend the outreach to folks to apply. Elizabeth Randall, who manages, who is doesn't manage, but she helps to manage the CAS program, is our associate government program analyst for that. And then again, Jessica Axman and Katie Iverson are instrumental behind the scenes to make all of these things happen. So skip over that. Mentioned earlier, admin code was March 1st, 2022 effective, and the effective date for the part 2 through 12 is January 1, 2023. So the 2022 CBC topics or items that were adopted and will become effective are fairly limited. In addition to adopting the previous CBC or the model code. But it clarifies the definition of access aisle. There are requirements that clarify maintenance of accessible features, separating the scoping for entrances and moving those exceptions to the exterior ground floor exits to 11B 207 accessible means of egress. So there was a bit of mixing going on there where it was mixing exits in with entrances, and those who are familiar with the accessibility provisions know that those two uses are distinctly different in the code in 11B and in CBC overall. It clarified the requirements for housing at a place of education and those express terms. If you're interested, if you haven't yet purchased or received your 2022 CBC, you can find the express terms on this hot link. We are coming close to January again, and at which point the valuation threshold will again increase. The current valuation threshold, as you probably know, which was set back in January 2022, is 186, 172. This will be updated in January. To go into some of the specifics, these are the express terms again, so you'll see the strike through if you're familiar with express terms, the strike through and underline as part of the new versus old language, strike through being old, underline being new. Standard or italic font is existing language. If it's italic, it's California. If it's standard font, it's model code. So essentially, it's simply clarifying the access aisle to be between vehicle spaces rather than parking, and struck through the first sentence and instead replaced it with features and facilities equipped required by Chapter 11B to be accessible to and usable by persons with disabilities shall be maintained in operable working condition. And sorry, that's the change to maintenance of accessible features, the prior being a slight change to the definition of access aisle. Under scoping, this is the inclusion of the exit language in with 11B 206.4.1, which has now been clarified and taken out of entrances, those exceptions taken out of the entrance section, and simply added to 11B 207.1 exceptions, which deals with accessible means of egress. So no real change there other than some administrative organization. Clarification on accessible dwelling units with adaptable features. Again, it's getting rid of some of the old language that may have been carried over from 11A and replacing it with more consistent public housing language for accessible dwelling units with adaptable features. And again, striking out the multi-bedroom housing language. Code adoption cycle we went over earlier. Moving on to our current cycle, which is again, we're in the pre-cycle activities. We did reconvene our ACC, which was really a huge success over the last year. We held a meeting. We selected new members that to replace those who had turned out. The ACC met, Access Code Collaborative, met on September 23rd, and we presented to them our proposals. Subsequently, in October, approximately a month later, we did hold a public workshop. And then we held a follow-up ACC meeting November 4th and on November 7th. All of those meetings were, I think, really widely, the public workshop was widely attended, and I know that the listening in folks at the ACC, both ACC meetings, had pretty good attendance on that as well. We got great feedback from ACC members on all the meetings, and are packaging that into our intervening code cycle proposals. And again, that's going to be effective July 1, 2024. Right at the end of this presentation, I'll go over a co-adopted section for Part 5 CV of the CPC, California Plumbing Code, that relates to all gender multi-user toilet facilities that we are co-adopting for non-residential facilities. The list here is a current bulleted list of topics that will be finalized in the next couple of days and submitted to building standards. As you can see, there's a great deal more in this intervening cycle, which is counter to what maybe past common practice might be, but there's nothing really in statute that stipulates that one should be larger than the other or vice versa. So we are really excited to be able to move this number of proposals forward. There's some really good and significant changes. The largest grouping of those relates to all gender toilet rooms. And there are some related sections that end up being triggered because of that. For instance, a urinal in a compartment is not something that was previously considered by Chapter 11B. And so the requirements related to that element are being included. And there's some language. I won't go over the express terms. Those will be submitted, and you absolutely get a chance to see those in the near future. But because of all the recent activity, it's really not, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to publish those in this venue 2 days before we publish them to submit them to Building Standards Commission. But the other related and administrative, there are some pointers that are being proposed, some new definitions related to blended transition. We're introducing a definition for elevator building for public housing in Chapter 11B, which is significant. And that was actually brought to us or in concept, was part of a concept brought to us by the ACC, by an ACC member, relating to some potential interpretive problems with public housing and units with adaptable features. So we're trying to clarify elevator building, and those you'll see later item, it's not enumerated, but section 213.3.1.2.1 and 233.3.1.2 adaptable units are part of that proposal. The other significant issue or concept is the inclusion of areas of safe dispersal and the fact that those were not explicitly required in the accessible means of egress. We're clarifying that for facilities, educational occupancies. That is 1028.5 exit discharge and 1009.2 continuity components. The exit discharge describes that that areas for safe dispersal must contain 2% compliant surface for wheelchairs. And then 1009.2 adds areas for safe dispersal to the list of, I think there's 10 items that are continued or considered to be accessible components of a means of egress. And it adds areas for safe dispersal in that. There are some other more minor administrative changes, which I won't go over for time constraints, but suffice to say that it's a fairly significant package, at least in number and in parts in concept as well. And so I'm just gonna, because we're at 11:55, I'm just gonna roll into the co-adoption of the plumbing, the inclusion of all gender multi-user facilities. So one of the comments that we received was that privacy compartment, which is described in the technical requirements, lacked a definition. And so we have included, we along with PSC have included a definition to privacy compartment that really limits or eliminates or provides for the visual privacy of a compartment when using compartments in an all gender facility. As you may know, the fixture calculations primarily are based upon a binary system, male and female, and the new requirements simply require you to still consistently calculate those total number of fixtures based upon those calculations, but that will ultimately, through the exception number 4, allow separate facilities not to be required. Sorry, that was a really clumsy way to say that, but currently separate facilities are required and by the plumbing code, and exception number 4 is really what provides for the allowance of an all gender. Again, not a requirement to provide all gender, but an allowance if a facility owner chooses to provide all gender facilities, you may, through the code, do so. We are aware that this really has been occurring already, and there is statute that is being, I believe, actually has been approved that allows for local jurisdictions to require all gender facilities, but the code simply is allowing those local jurisdictions to apply that if they so choose. And with that, I reached our Q&A. We have 2 minutes to spare, but I believe Gilbert has some agenda items to cover too. So apologize for getting through it so quickly, but appreciate your time. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
I see no questions here, Eric. No questions here. We do have 2 minutes left. If you are pressed for time and you need to have a hard stop at 12, please feel free to go. This meeting is being recorded, so you come back and check out what we have said in the past, in the beginning of this meeting, and additionally with follow-up documents and slides. Next up on the agenda here, just to round it off, I think it's, let's see, second. Regional managers, if there's any regional issues that you'd like to cover very briefly, this was just an agenda item, not to put you on the spot or anything, but just if there's any topics that you'd like to discuss. If not, don't mind it, but